Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Late Night Learning. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Palumba. In this third part of media economics, we're going to wrap up lecture thinking about network externalities and thinking about kind of some final thoughts for media economics. Let's get started. So we've gone through a lot about what audiences should be thinking about. We should also consider what media firms should be thinking about as well. We've gone through the principle of duplication. We've gone through lowest common denominator. We've gone through several models as ways in which to conceptualize and prioritize audience behavior and preferences and tastes. But how do we figure out the value of a consumer? Value per consumer is independent of the number reached. That's the first principle here when we think about audience rate. David is worth $5 to advertisers, regardless of him and 300 watch an advertisement, or if it's him and 3,000 others. This is known as CPM, which we will get into further during the television lecture. But CPM means cost per thousand. And we will get into that math a little bit later. But for now, I want you to note that particularly in a segment, all audience viewers are worth the same. But that's in a segment. And if we think about Steiner's principle of duplication, that principle assumes all viewers are valued the same. That's no longer true. What we do have here is a shift in the model, a shift in the marketplace. We have audiences who are segmented, and all 30 of them, or all 30 million of them, are all worth $5 or maybe $4. And so if I am an advertiser and if I know that 1 million people will watch The Voice on NBC and I value all of those audiences, or NBC values all of those audiences, or NBC and I have a conversation about those audiences, and we agree to value each one at $4, well, $4 per audience member times 1 million, they're worth $4 million. There's no variation within that group. There is no competition across product markets as well. This is also important to note. GM, General Motors, which is an automobile company, their returns from advertising are really not impacted by Johnson & Johnson's returns for advertising. It's different product verticals, different product industries, and they're going after audiences with different commercials. When consumers enjoy advertisements, they may be charged readers more for the magazine or newspaper. So they may charge readers more for the magazine or newspaper. As such, ad prices may be discounted in favor of raising subscription or price rates of media platforms. And so this is also important to note here. And so if consumers really enjoy advertisements, newspapers and magazines may charge more. That's also a very interesting issue. As you may have noticed, magazines and newspapers have a plethora of advertisements in them these days. It is because the cost of distribution has increasingly gone up as more and more subscribers seek digital or alternative options, such as not paying at all. And so to recoup those losses, a lot of magazines and newspapers have made the leap toward including more advertisements. I can speak to that because I subscribe to The Economist and Variety. And in Variety, there are now advertisements for housing, in particular mansions, and other things that are luxury-based. And so that shift illustrates to me that Variety is seeking to keep its magazine revenue healthy at the moment. So consumers are also charged higher if they seek to avoid advertisements. And that's something else to be mindful of as well. You may have audience members who are seeking to avoid advertisements. Let's move along. But what about the advertisers? Well, there's kind of a seesaw effect in markets. When one group is served better, another one may be served worse off. This is especially true when we think of particular consumer segments. And so it may very well be that millennials are served pretty well in the marketplace. This may be to the chagrin or to the loss of older generations, or to Generation Z for that matter. Advertisers do make less profit the more platforms they are on. Remember, they are forced to find consumers. And so if their consumers are all over the place, it may be more difficult to find consumers who are engaged for their particular advertisement. If there are more media platforms available, ad prices go down at first. Because again, if you can advertise across a whole gamut of platforms, it may be less costly to go on any of them because there's some sort of competition there. But later they recover and actually increase as advertisers seek to purchase more media space. Advertisers become better off, consumers are usually worse off. Platforms raise prices per viewer to reduce ad nuisance, but advertisers still must compete despite this. And so platforms may raise prices per viewer to avoid the amount of ad duplication or the amount of ads, period. But advertisers, of course, continue to compete on media time available that they can purchase on NBC, Fox, and so on and so forth. Consumers are also better off with more variety and more competition. This is difficult. Some advertisers will purchase particular space on a show in perpetuity or for an extended period of time on an SVOD service. That's why you get the same cat food commercial when you're watching Hulu. And I'm sure it drives you nuts, drives me nuts. But it's because that particular brand, let's say Fancy Feast, has purchased the time frame to be an advertiser on that show for an extended amount of time. This is also kind of a defensive strategy to ensure no other advertisements are exhibited. Let's move along. And so finally, to wrap this up, if we're thinking about advertisers may seek out cost-effective advertisements across different platforms based on costs of advertisements to exhibit on each platform. How expensive is it for me to have a billboard in Times Square? What about on television? What about on SVOD services? What about a product placement in a video game? Return on ad placed in one platform may be dependent on whether the advertiser has already reached the consumer through another platform. Well, we're Honda, and we've already engaged Generation Z who are currently in college by reaching out to them on Snapchat, Hulu. And so advertising on Amazon Go, we could do it, but I don't know that we're going to get the ROI or return on investment that we were really looking for. The price of advertising may drop if advertisers think that they are generating second impressions with consumers rather than exclusive ones. And so the price of advertising is something that fluctuates quite frequently, depending upon the availability of audience members and really depending upon the availability of media platforms. It's a constant negotiation that goes on all the time. If we think about television upfronts, which all of you should be familiar with if you are not, Google TV upfronts. It is a week in May, or a few weeks in May, in which each TV network essentially parades itself in front of a group of advertisers in New York City and illustrates what TV shows are coming up in the fall and why they think that they will be able to have sizable audiences. And usually a lot of media space is bought up at those negotiations, in the billions with a B, is purchased in a matter of weeks, even a matter of hours for that matter. Well, that's all the time we have on Late Night Learning. As always, keep laughing and keep learning.